Okay, so the next panel, this panel is Future of the Digital Economy. We've got counting 6 really amazing people from different industries. What I want to do on this panel is really mix it up. We've got people from the content business, from infrastructure, we've got lawyers, we've got creators, we've got record producers. I really want to begin to address the opportunities in the new digital economy. The way we're going to run this panel is everyone's just going to very, very briefly introduce themselves, telling the audience who they are, what they're up to, and then I'm going to warm everyone up with a short question, which they'll give a short response, and then we'll make it as interactive in terms of the conversation with the panelists. And of course, we'll leave some time at the end for audience questions. So let's start with Mike Fricklas. Mike, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Mike Fricklas. I'm Executive Vice President, General Counsel of Viacom. Company, our principal businesses are MTV Networks, about 140 cable networks around the world, and Paramount Pictures and BET, which is another one of the cable networks.
Matt Serletic. It's a Hungarian. It's my best Hungarian attempt of the morning.
How you guys doing? I'm Matt Serletic. Glad to be here. My background's in the music industry. I'm a songwriter and record producer and label owner. And I've been fortunate to sell a lot of records, making music, and formerly chairman and CEO of Virgin Records as well. So glad to be here.
So we've got some real heavy hitters here. Tom Adams, I think, is the most he's shamefully proficient in languages. So Tom, how many languages do you speak?
And so I'll say I speak 4 fluently, and then a few others more at a more basic level.
And why?
So I'm. So the first bit is all about how I grew up, which was that I moved around. My parents moved from country to country, and so I grew up in France and England, although I'm Swedish by birth. Learned Spanish later on by being immersed in the Spanish language and culture by living there for a while. But I've also sort of used our own product now, Rosetta Stone, to sort of learn Chinese, and then I'm sort of learning some Russian.
Jim Kavanagh.
Good morning. I'm Jim Kavanagh. I'm the president of the American Society of Media Photographers, ASMP. ASMP is the preeminent trade association for photographers whose work is primarily for publication. We have 7,000 members in the United States and in a number of countries abroad. Our principal mission for our members is to protect and promote the interests of publication photographers, and we do that through widespread industry education and advocacy.
Kathy Wolf. Kathy has been very kind enough to bring some stickers with today. So, Kathy.
I pay to play. If you'll indulge me, I've written a small statement about what we do, since I don't think Wolf is a very well-known company as my other panelists are. So, to begin, Wolf
You'll keep it short, Kathy, right?
I will, very short. Wolf began in 1985 in the basement of my small home in San Jose, California. We had a vision that we could change the world by making on-screen images of gay, lesbian lives visible and accessible. Looking for purpose and meaning in my work, I sought out like-minded and talented, motivated individuals to join me, and together we founded Wolf Video and Wolf Releasing. 26 years later, we've become the largest exclusive distributor of gay feature films in the world. We are still passionate about our work, which today is as important as ever. My staff of 9 is like a family. 7 have been with me for over 10 years, and 2 have been part of the Wolf family for more than 20. To say we are dedicated to a passion and to a purpose is an understatement. We are also lucky that the filmmakers we serve are also passionate about telling the stories of their lives. For them, funding comes almost without exception from the grassroots sources. Credit cards, savings, family loans are often their only options. And I think it's safe to say no one is getting rich in the process.
Thank you. So, Osama Hussein, what are you passionate about?
Well, I serve as in-house counsel for Bay TSP, which provides services for all the issues that were raised in the last panel. So I'm an intellectual property attorney specializing in patent and copyright law. We're passionate about getting content owners there upholding their rights.
Great. Well, let's start with some questions. I want to again throw some questions. I want you to be I want to break down the silos. We've put this panel together, and indeed the whole nature of Arts+Labs is to break down the silos between the content and technology industries and make everybody understand that we have the same opportunities and the same challenges across these silos, whether it's music, movies, books, and so on. So, Mike, I have a weekly TechCrunch TV show. Last week I had Peter Stern, the head of strategy of Time Warner Cable, on. And you guys, of course, Viacom and Time Warner Cable haven't always seen eye to eye. But Peter said that he thinks that piracy has actually killed the music business. And from our previous panel, there's certainly some more evidence for that. Do you think that if piracy isn't confronted in your industry, particularly in book, television, movies, that it could kill those industries too?
I think that one of the problems with this particular debate is the resort to extremes, and then it's easy to refute things that happen on the extreme. There is a music business today. We heard Susanna Vega talk about it. It is a much smaller music business. It is in many ways a volunteer music business by people who have to spend their days doing other things. There are older artists and a small number of newer artists who are making money at it. The movie business will be the same in the sense that it will still exist. But we are already seeing in our industry, significant economic impact from piracy, and that impact has an immediate effect on the number of movies we make, on the risks we take, on the kinds of investments that we make. It reduces. You've seen the support of independent film is reduced because those films are no longer as profitable to make. In many cases, are not profitable to make, and so you've seen the number of movies that are being made be dramatically reduced. So what it'll result in is a less interesting movie industry. It'll result in a movie industry that has many fewer jobs in it, an industry that takes ever fewer risks as we go forward.
Matt, we're supposed to look up now in the entertainment business, look up into the cloud. We're seeing a number of remarkably new, innovative businesses and models emerging. Obviously, we all know about iCloud, which Steve Jobs announced a couple of weeks ago. Netflix and Spotify are streaming their work. Is this the solution both to next generation business models, particularly in music, and also a solution to the problem of piracy?
Well, I think, there's nothing that's going to eradicate piracy. Piracy has been here with us the whole time, obviously dramatically reducing the music business over the last 10 years. We're half the size we were 10 years ago. Significant, obviously. But I think what we're finally seeing is technology that created the problem is now actually trying to help solve the problem. A company that I'm a co-founder of called Music Mastermind is trying to help users and content owners engage in new ways of dialogue and creation with each other and creating new revenue models. I think that's what we're seeing on a kind of a large scale rollout as the cloud becomes something that can capture and create economy as opposed to destroy it. We do see that for the first time ever, we can actually make a service out of music as opposed to a single one-by-one digital sale. And I think that is the way of the future. That's where we're heading, more of a service situation where people pay a la carte and get involved with music as a lifestyle.
So, Tom, you're not up in the cloud yet. You're selling still hardware, or you're selling CDs, and you've taken down 1,000 rogue websites over the last 18 months. What have you learned? What has the process been like? How can you help other, perhaps smaller business people like Kathy Wolf? How can you help them figure out this new world of ubiquitous piracy?
So I think that, for a company like Rosetta Stone, there's actually things we can do, and this activity every single day. We have an enforcement team that's communicating with the different search engines and ISPs and is very, very active. But the reality is, for most people, that's just not an option. So if you don't have a dedicated department, there's just no way you can do the kinds of things we do. And by the way, for us, even though we do take down these 1,000 rogue websites, it's probably the same criminals, all based in China, just flipping new rogue websites. They're continuing to do business with our beloved search engines here in the United States. That's a profitable, ongoing relationship that lasts for multiple years. These search engines are maybe sort of taking down the individual link, but they don't terminate the relationship with a criminal. And quite frankly, the kinds of efforts that we're able to carry out don't lead to good outcomes for us. We are a company that's suffered a lot of piracy over the last few years as we've become more successful. It has slowed down our growth rate. It has inevitably led to us hiring less people. We're a company that grew from 100 people back in 2002 to over 2,000 now. But obviously, in an environment like this, we're not going to be a job-creating powerhouse unless protection comes. I would correct you on one thing, which is that Rosetta Stone's always been online. We've been a product that's been deliverable just by streaming throughout our history since 2000, essentially.
And do you see streaming then as a more secure business model?
Absolutely. But what we're doing is we're compromising the user experience. When we give users the choice between a streaming relationship or a download relationship or an install so that they can use it anywhere, they prefer the install. So what we're really saying is that we want people to only use solutions when they're online. And quite frankly, in our own lives, we have these iPods and so on where you're able to use the product offline for music. But for something like interactive software, you need something more than that. And so what we've seen is just a direction in business models, whether that's for music industry or for us, that's really about security. And yet I think this Protect IP Act would do a lot to make it a much more customer-centric approach for a company like us, where we'd really be trying to do what's right for the customer rather than what's right for our own security.
I like that term, customer centricity. I asked Suzanne Vega a question about that, and certainly when you see new acts like Lady Gaga so popular, they have new relationships with their audience. Kathy, you run a small movie company, movie distribution company. What are you finding that your audience wants? How do they want to spend their money in digital distribution? Is it buying the traditional DVDs or is it in streaming? And how is piracy affecting your relatively small business in comparison to some of the other people on this panel?
Well, we found our movies, say like 5 years ago, we would sell almost all of our movies via DVD. Now it's down to about 30% of that. And the rest is, I think we would conservatively split that between legitimate streaming download sources and piracy. To speak specifically, I'd like to just talk about the release of this movie, A Marine Story, which we released March 15th. And we already have taken down to date over 65,000 links. Each link represents over 100 to 1,000 downloads. This is not the kind of situation that's conducive to filmmakers even getting their money back, let alone any encouragement for creative forces to give any diversity to our community.
Jim, you can't stream a photograph, right? Or can you?
Well, you can download a photograph quite easily. But it's not, in essence, a streaming
When I wrote my book, Cult to the Amateurs, the book came out in 2007, and it was a book that was very aggressive in defense of the content business. I found that the group of people who were perhaps most sympathetic to where I was coming from in my book were photographers. Whenever I had a photographer take my picture for the book, afterwards they always come up to me and say, yeah, we understand exactly what you're saying. We're on the front lines of this. And I think photographers are. Why are they on the front lines? And what are you experiencing? How are you fighting this scourge? And what are the business models in your mind of the future?
Well, to talk about the being on the front line, photography is, with technology, has become easier to copy. When I started in this business as a kid, in 1975, you could run down to the local lab and get your film duplicated for 50 cents a slide. It was easy to duplicate then, but not as easy today. Part of it, we've talked about on the other panel, Suzanne talked about it this morning, the culture, the blurring of the lines between copyrightable work and fair use. Those types of things have led people to copy photographs and download them quite frequently. But we don't face the same issue as perhaps the music or the movie industry or others, because we don't see one photographer's image being downloaded a million times. It's a wider spread issue, smaller. But it's also, as Susan said, the interesting thing for the photography industry, and it struck a chord with me today, she just sort of said it in passing. She goes, I'm not interested in building structure to penalize the 92% of people that use and download properly to go after the others. In AS&P, what we're looking at is a tremendous change in the business models brought about by technology, and not just the technology of how we create and distribute the images, looking at it from the content creation side, but also how clients and end users are using that technology. Our photographers are primarily people that work for publications, and it's a case that's mostly corporate, educational, institutional, government, and there are so many more channels today to distribute the work, and hence a greater need for content. So we've looked at it from a different point. Rather than getting locked into this idea of woe is me, we've got a problem to solve, we're looking at how do we exploit what we see as an opportune time to build new models and new ways for our members to license their content in this tremendous new plethora of communication channels that we have today. Ultimate game changer right here in how things are being done, and companies and educators and that will communicate. So we see it at this particular point as a tough economic time, and one of the things that we also see and discuss is we have piracy problems, we have copyright issues, but we also have a bad economy. And sometimes we tend to meld those two together and make things worse than they are, rather than realizing these are independent events taking place at the same time. So we look at it a little bit differently, and I think that we want to focus more on where do the opportunities for the future lie. And quite frankly, seeing the explosion of technology and the explosion of communication, the shrinking of the world as a whole, and talking about 60% of the U.S. exports being intellectual property, I think we're on the cusp of a very exciting time. But that does not minimize the importance of copyright. One of the things that we preach to our members now is that controlling your copyright, registering your copyright, understanding what copyright brings to you is now more important than ever, so you can leverage that to be a player in it. And on the other side, what we're very concerned about as independent creators is we look at, sometimes we divide the world into the copyright and the copy left, where everything should be free and the open internet and the copyright really strong. But we look at ourselves as copy moderates, because sometimes what happens is the small independent creators, in order to play in the big leagues with consolidation of publishing and a lot of other things, the strong copyright laws allow the big independent distributors to go to the independent creator and say, well, you have to give up your copyright if you want to work for us. And we think that's where a stronger problem is.
So Osama Hussain, who is the in-house counsel for BAID TSP. Osama, I came across your company. I was doing a piece for the Directors Guild of America for their quarterly magazine about the impact of piracy on independent movies. And you're the guys who really know what's going on. You're the guys who monitor the internet. You're the guys who understand the number of illegal downloads and all that sort of thing. What's really going on? You're the person who can open up the eyes of the audience today.
Well, I think
without putting too much pressure on you, of course.
Yeah, thanks for that intro. The biggest problem that our clients or content owners have is who do they go after, right? So the what is easy for what they're trying to do. It's stop the piracy of their content and figure out a way to monetize that content. But it's who, right? If you think of it as a piracy continuum, where on one side you have the criminals and the other side you have consumers, people really actually want to buy the content. There are parties in between along the continuum where the content owners have to decide, what are we going to do? Are we going to enforce against these people or are we not? So on the criminal side, what I'll call is hackers or hacks, if you will, you go from the hackers to the casual pirates to the frustrated consumer to the confused consumer. And the question is then, what is a content owner going to do against a hacker? They usually have no problem enforcing their copyrights against those people. But what happens when it's a confused consumer? Nobody wants to call a confused consumer a bad guy, and if you follow that through, of course, the content owner becomes a bad guy when it hits the press. The question then is, why did the confused consumer think it was legitimate content? And our problem that we're seeing is there's lots of piracy, pirated content available on sites that make things very easy to upload and download. A consumer believes that they're on a site that's supported by a content owner when it actually isn't, and they think, well, it's so easy, it must be. Another one is are the live streaming sites. People will search for sporting events, and a quick search on Google will find you lots of different avenues for finding pirated live streaming. And the question then becomes, why should the consumer believe that it's not supported, right? Especially because lots of these pirated sites are now generating ad revenue because they have legitimate advertisements on there. It's not for the content, it's for things related to the content. And any average consumer looks at this and says, well, if they're advertising deodorant, this must be legitimate, right? I mean, it could be anything. So that's the biggest problem is, how do content owners monetize their content, stop piracy without hurting the people that actually would be buying this otherwise?
Well, I like the way you frame that. So it's a lovely day outside. I think we should have reason to be cheerful. We need to have reason to be cheerful. If we're continually bemoaning the past, we're not going anywhere. So what I want to do now is just have from each panelist a reason to be cheerful about the future of the digital economy. Mike, I saw you playing with your iPad. I'm sure not me playing, probably doing some serious work on it in another panel. Unfortunately, I haven't brought it out for this. Concentrating on the panel. Does the iPad give you reason to be cheerful about the future of the digital economy?
Oh, there's lots to be cheerful about with the future of the digital economy. We're as a company and as an individual, I'm stunned by all of the tremendous value that's being created by technology. And as a company, it gives us a ton of new ways for our consumers to interact with what we create, and frankly, some new customers who introduce new competition into the supply chain, into our distribution chain that we love. One of our biggest customers now is Netflix. Hulu is a big customer. These are new ways that consumers experience our products. I find Netflix is on in my house probably at least as much as the cable television with my kids watching it. I think these are experiences that consumers really like. They're licensed experiences, and they're creating tremendous value.
I mean, Hulu is an amazing service. They have if you're part of Hulu Plus, For $7, you get access to all the Criterion movies ever made. So basically, you have access for $7 a month to stream all the greatest movies ever made. Now, surely that is good enough reason to stop people stealing, isn't it? And, Netflix and Spotify have similar models.
Well, it's not quite that simple, unfortunately. As soon as we put a movie up, somebody on the last panel, one of the things I did on my iPad, one of the last panel was I did that Google search that was mentioned, and I typed in Super 8 torrent. Super 8 is a movie that we have that opened just last weekend. And sure enough, the first things that came up were a bunch of websites, some of which mentioned, which would clearly be rogues. And it's easy to download Super 8. Now, Super 8's in the movie theaters today, right? So what's coming up as a torrent of a camcorder that was made somewhere around the world. That movie would hopefully have an income stream that would take you through after theatrical, a home video window, maybe a pay television window, and then find its way onto services like Netflix and Hulu. But that part of the economic model of making a movie is giving people the opportunity to pay a little more for a better experience at the front end, and then have other experiences that are a little lower value later in the movie's life. And that's how movies return their investment. Netflix and Hulu do not address that high part of the value chain, which is now being the highest part of the value chain, which is particularly being harmed here. As well, piracy really undermines Hulu and Netflix as well. To the extent that those services are easy, and to the extent that consumers believe, and some of these sites truly look professional, some of them look better than professional, to the extent consumers really believe that those are real legitimate ways to acquire movies, and they are free, it raises the question over the long run whether Hulu and Netflix should be willing to pay the kinds of prices they pay when the same products are available at lower prices.
Matt, you and I did an event last month in San Francisco. You talked about the new relationship between the musical artist and the fan. Is that reason to be cheerful?
I think it is. I'll kind of give a little example from my past. When I was running Virgin, if some of you may know, there's an album called The Grey Album, which is a mashup of the Beatles and Jay-Z. Now, here I am. I'm the CEO of a major record label in America, and I hear about this thing that's happening, and I can't hear it. It's off limits. I'm in the EMI building. How dare I? So the A&R, one of my A&R guys smuggles it in off the street for us to just check it out what's going on. So, here's this illegal thing in my office. I ended up hiring Danger Mouse to work with Gorillaz, a band that was successful. He produced, and the guy that made that illegal mashup now has a successful career in the music industry. And what we're doing what I'm seeing and what we're doing at companies like Music Mastermind is we're finding ways to actually make that legitimate. We're taking bits of music and letting people interact with it in ways that remunerate both the content owners, the publishers, and the users themselves. And I think that's really exciting. I think that's a new frontier that we spend a lot of time building out relationships to invite people into that conversation. So we've done a deal with Universal, et cetera, et cetera. We've got all the major content owners involved in this business. It's now a way to actually get everybody involved and play fair.
Tom, you're a remarkable linguist. Do you think that the internet today is making people greedier for knowledge and in that greed wanting them to actually spend some money online as well? Are you optimistic about the direction
of the
digital economy?
Yeah, I think that the least developed part of our economy to some extent is education. And there's an enormous opportunity for technology to disrupt that. And we're very excited at Rosetta Stone about all the opportunities. Clearly, piracy, which is a tremendous problem right now, for us, will ultimately be solved through legislation like the one that's being considered, and also technology changes. For our company, it's really coming down to augmenting the amount of live that we provide in our offerings. So right now, if you buy one of our offerings, you also get to practice with native speakers live that we contract with, and that becomes a core part of the success of your learning experience. And I can imagine how just across education, you'll see innovation like that, where people sort of embed a service with an interactive digital experience and create offerings that are very difficult to copy because there are sort of live components. But beyond that, I would actually call out the iPad and the whole Apple ecosystem with iCloud as something that's really exciting, because I think it just creates a much safer environment for content providers, and the customer expectation of being able to access on multiple devices the same form of content means that, this ad hoc nature of the Wild West of the internet will be more just structurally safer. So as people fall in love with those kinds of devices and that kind of functionality, I think it will be a much better environment for content producers.
Jim, the iPad is a wonderful device for looking at photographs. Is it making you, I mean, not that this is, of course, a panel. This is not an advertisement for Apple, but are the emergence of other tablet forms of hardware and other exciting kinds of devices, are they reasons to be cheerful for photographers?
Sure, because this is just the Model T. I mean, this is the infant. This is the first step, I think, on a lot of new product. And again, I think where the excitement comes is looking at that as these tools become available and widely used, people who want to get their message out or educate or communicate are going to want to access these tools and have these different channels. And that all those channels, filling those channels requires content. So I think that the technology is giving us new markets that need to be filled by the content creator. So it's positive from that particular point of view. I think one of the things that's been most difficult in my industry is that the models have changed, and for a long time things were very stable. We lived in a print paradigm, and how we licensed our content was well known. It was difficult to license. It was a very cumbersome process. And today in ASMP, in our boardroom, we talk about having to deprogram our members from everything we taught them from 1976 on, when the copyright law changed, to where copyright and new technology is today, to understand how to work within these types of models, and also to make the licensing of the content easier. The term we're using a lot is frictionless licensing. And one of the things that's been difficult in the music industry and the photography industry and others is licensing, getting a license to use it. And we look at that Apple infrastructure and we look at something like iTunes, and it made the licensing component, the ease of acquisition, simple. Same thing with Creative Commons, which to a lot of people in my industry carries a negative connotation because it's not commercial and it's allowing free use of images, but yet it makes the acquisition of a copyrightable work for use easy and simple. So I think we're looking at a lot of those ideas, is how do we simplify that process for the end user to acquire the content. Netflix is a great example of simplifying.
Kathy, how are digital developments benefiting a small media company like yours? What advice would you give to somebody in the audience who's thinking of building a movie distribution, a small movie distribution business, or music or book distribution business on the internet? What do you learn?
Wow. I wouldn't do that just now.
Well, that's pretty. We've got to be cheerful. It's sunny outside.
Cheerful. Well, I am cheerful about several things, and that is that our films have gone on to be represented at iTunes, Netflix, Comcast On Demand, Time Warner On Demand, Vudu, Xbox, PlayStation, Blockbuster.com, and 10 other places. That's very encouraging for me because it gives my audience the opportunity to do the right thing. Being out there as big as possible is, I think, key for me right now. Additionally, I represent an audience that really cares about the arts and creativity. And so we've actually instituted a grassroots campaign within our niche market called I Pay to Play, where we are educating through, I made a series of PSAs for our DVDs that playfully speak to the topic of online piracy and how it hurts our movement. We're asking people to support our stories And we've created these information cards that are going to all lesbian and gay film festivals that are speak to the danger of online piracy, and we have these stickers, and we're sending all this information to all our filmmakers. We represent over probably 200 filmmakers, and so we're mobilizing our force to be a strong, unified voice in the movement to make illegal downloading uncool. And
well, that's great. I think that's one reason to be very cheerful. Osama, what reasons do we have from your point of view to be cheerful in terms of new technologies out there to put an end to this damn piracy thing?
Well, just as the digital economy in general, I think that everyone should be smiling. I mean, we have legislature that's trying to be worked through. I mean, it takes time, but they're trying. And we have, for example, the DMCA takedown tools that are made available and services that are made available. You can argue whether they are effective or not, but, the government's trying. And the industry is trying as well. Some ISPs have set up a procedure for search link removal. That's great, right? They understand that content owners are having problems keeping the pirated information off. And sure, the search link removal doesn't necessarily remove the site, but it removes being able to find the site. Of course, you got to follow the procedures. And right now, we're working with a consortium of content owners for aggregating audience data for example, for cyberlockers. This information is based upon set infringement levels, and it's great for content owners to get this information because they need to know what they can do. And until they have this information organized in a fashion that is understandable, it's just they're shooting in the dark. So, I mean, it's great. Everyone's working together. Some people aren't working as hard as others, but that's life.
Excellent. Well, you've certainly cheered me up. Thank you. And now we are going to open the floor to questions, or open the panel to questions, or the floor to panels, or whatever we are. And given, as I said, it's so nice outside, let's try and have some positive questions. Let's try and move forward here, rather than not get sucked into these battles of the past. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Paris for the EG8 Sarkozy's thing about the future of the internet. And of course, Larry Lessig shows up, and listening to him, it's like we're back in the 90s. And I think the challenge now is to move forward, not get sucked into these old debates which really haven't got us anywhere. And I think we have so many reasons to be cheerful about the internet economy. There's still certain threats, but the legislation is obviously there and is moving forward. So let's have questions that are positive. And I'm particularly interested in questions from the audience, people in the digital economy who see solutions, who are optimistic, and explain why, what you might add to what the panelists have already said today.
Have you tried crowdsource financing, Kickstarter, that kind of independent financing for your film?
Kickstarter. We use Kickstarter all the time to help
Great.
our filmmakers make their films.
And what is that, Kickstarter?
Would you like to explain it?
Kickstarter is a program whereby filmmakers can put their projects on the internet and ask for money. And if people believe in their project, they'll donate to that and raise the funds to create their project.
So
and we oftentimes will read scripts and offer the perspective that if this were to be made, we would distribute it. And that often helps our Kickstarter program.
It's sort of like public service television, where people pledge to donate and then get benefit packages in various levels of pledge. And if the donation incentive reaches a certain level, then the funding comes through and the project is funded.
Yeah, I think it's a lovely point, because Suzanne Vega made the point today, and Kathy made the point that we need to make it clear that the piracy isn't cool. And one way to make that is to involve the audience, involve more people in the creative process as investors, as partners. And I think the kinds of things you're talking about are bringing more audience people into the media business, which is good for them, it's good for us, and it means that they, I think, appreciate the value of this stuff rather than just taking it.
Thank you. Matt, I liked your statement about frictionless licensing. Reminds me of going back to the 90s, things we were looking at with micropayments and sort of that whole model that kind of arose and then died. But it seems to be something that could empower consumers to buy into, I think, new processes here, where I think the worry is, and it came out, I think, from the man who spoke as a musician, that a lot of people don't really believe that consumers are their concerns are being addressed, and I think that needs to be part of the quid pro quo here. Is it's not completely in either or, and it's not completely a black and white situation here. So I'd love to hear from the panel what things like fictionless licensing may be part of these solutions.
Well, I wouldn't mind starting on that, because I think there's some issues that are political issues, and then there's some issues that, in terms of kind of the bulk, the large volume of the way content is consumed, really make a huge difference. One of those is we were talking about Netflix and Hulu. If you think about it, what those are very efficient licensing mechanisms. You pay one fee. A consumer pays one fee and pays it every month, and all of the licensing is transparent to them. We're a partner in a business called Rhapsody, which is a subscription music service. You don't have to pay attention to where the music is coming from and who's taking care of the licenses. Somebody's doing that for you for a fixed fee. You have access to just an enormous volume. And so the private market has kind of built up something that has elements of compulsory licensing, to listen to some of the things that Larry Lessig might have been talking about, that have actually addressed exactly that issue.
For us, we take a different approach of actually putting it in front of the consumer and the user. Fully 84% of people that don't play an instrument or make music wish they could. And so Music Mastermind, we empower that goal of being able to create, being able to enter the musical dialogue and become fluent in the musical language. And we show people, we actually make it fun to do, we kind of gamify the whole process, and they get to see that they own something, that they've made something. And by them actually experiencing that for the first time, they starts to understand the value of making something and owning intellectual property.
Yeah, man, I'll just jump in on the more positive statement, maybe around, even beyond these licensing structures. If you think about the whole world at large, really looks to the U.S. for leadership on matters of intellectual property. And so part of my excitement and optimism is that if this legislation goes through here in the U.S., it's very likely that other countries are going to look to that piece of law and think about implementing it in their own countries. And that's going to create enormous revenue opportunity for all the industries represented up here. Because while we complain and moan sometimes about our own situation here in the U.S., it's much better than in many countries overseas. And there's something like $60 billion worth of U.S. software being stolen every single year around the world. So I'm often amused by these whole notions of the trade deficit, because when I travel, a lot of people use a lot of American stuff, and yet they don't pay for it. And you sort of ask yourself, what would the real trade deficit be if the music that people listen to was paid for, the software was paid for? And if we can just get the environment and the model right here in the U.S., then we can suggest very strongly that other countries consider that, and that will create just this benign environment for content players
I
around the world.
agree with that, although I think there is one point to be made in this, is when again I was at this EG8 thing a couple of weeks ago in Paris, and what's really interesting is that the most vocal critics of the large entertainment industry and of paid content tend to come from America. So I think the challenge in America in particular, and the purpose of these kind of panels and of Arts and Labs, is to bring the creative industries of the old silos together in the 21st century, and that the movie, the book business, the technology industry, we need to speak as a common voice. We may not always agree on everything, But if we can speak on a common voice, we have a lot more power, because the other side, in some ways, speaks with a very common voice, and that voice gets heard.
I think that's very true.
Question for Michael regarding Netflix. As recently as 12 months ago, you were hearing a lot of angst from the major studios in particular, not perhaps Paramount as loudly as some of the others, but regarding Netflix and its impact on the value of the content, and there was fear that its price points were driving down the value of movie content online. More recently, you hear friendlier things coming out of the major studios, major media companies regarding Netflix. Has Netflix, why has that changed? Is it something Netflix has changed? Or is it simply that they've broken out the checkbook? Have you guys figured something out about Netflix that wasn't obvious 12 months ago?
As a business matter, it's a multi-dimensional problem, right? Netflix is in some ways competing against older businesses. In some ways, it's the way consumers interact with it is new, and so people are trying to understand whether it was a substitute for existing models of television or an addition to it. They're trying to understand how it changed the dynamics of the windowing cycle that we talked about. Its effect on piracy is a factor in that analysis, and a positive effect, but I think people are still trying to understand what the many lines down the road implications of that business model are going to be. And then each of the media companies is in a different position in terms of what established businesses they're in and the like. So I think that people, as change comes through a very complicated set of businesses, people are going to worry, and they're going to try to figure out how it fits in with their existing businesses.
I think we've got to end now. That was a wonderful panel. I want to really thank our panelists.